Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian and I've always had a massive fascination with games in the space genre, and with a whole slew of new space games arriving pretty soon, I thought it time just to have a bit of a discussion about the top things I'd love to see in the space games. So as we all know, the space game genre come very close to dying off over the previous decade or so, in fact quite a bit over a decade. And in that intermittent time there was a few games out there that did manage to survive that test of time. Of course, one of them was the X series and the other being EVE Online, both games which managed to keep people going for a while. But now there's been a resurgence of space games. There's been a few released over the recent couple of years, and of course there's a few big ones coming over the next few months and the next year or two. As I said early on, space games have always inspired me, and in large part that is due to their sheer openness. Even back in the early years when I used to play Frontier Elite 2 and Starglider, they were all games of epic proportions. And that's something that maybe now space games are only just bound to catch back up on again. And really, to be appealing to me, space games have to have a certain bunch of features. Now, many of the games coming up do have these features, so whilst I'm not talking about any game in particular here, some of the subjects I touch on here will of course be featured in certain games. So the first thing I look for then in a space game is for it to be open world. Now that may seem quite obvious, but to me, not all space games are completely open world, and to some degree the X series are a good example of a game that's not entirely open world. Of course it's open world in the sense that you can go where you want and do what you want, but it's not entirely open world in the sense that, well, space is big, and X just was never really all that big. Essentially each area, each system that you went into was a box, a small room that was interconnected to another room via the jump gates. Now, as much as I like the X games, and I've really got nothing bad to say against them, this was one of the things that really did put me off from playing them. An open world needs to be a part of a space game to encourage the sense of immersion that I really do crave. But it doesn't really matter how many star systems a space game has, at least not to me. It could just have one star system, or it could have a few 100 billion. In the end, it's all the same. Star systems are unimaginably large, and within our very own solar system, there are literally hundreds of different bodies to explore. We may just have 8 planets, but there are a number of dwarf planets there, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of moons. Jupiter and Saturn, for example, each have somewhere in the region of 60 moons each. Now, some of them are undoubtedly very small, but they all provide for ample opportunity to explore. So as long as space is an open area and not a set of interconnected boxes, then even a single star system can make for a huge playing space. And of course, to maintain this sense of immersion, this sense of illusion that you're playing within a vast area, the top speed of your ship would need to be relative to the size of the gameplay space. So no going too fast and crossing the bounds of space within just a few minutes. So that's the area of the game covered, which in a space game is very, very important. One of the other things I like to see in space games is landable planets. This is something that's recently become available in Elite Dangerous with the Horizons expansion, but Horizons is far from the first game that's allowed people to land on planets. There's been many examples of that going right back to the 16-bit computing era, which includes games like I mentioned before. Even Starglider allowed you to land on planets. But planets need to be done right. Now, I'm not talking about the sense of realism here or their sense of size necessarily, but they need to be immersive. Both Space Engine and Elite Dangerous do very, very good jobs of this, and that's in large part because, especially Elite Dangerous, they have very realistic planets. And Space Engine 2 does an exceptional job of this. And Infinity Battlescape, which you can see playing here right now, arguably has some of the best planets out there. But realism is by no means an essential requirement. What is a requirement, of course, is believability. And whilst we all have different tolerances for our sense of disbelief, I think a game like No Man's Sky is idyllic for its sense of planets. At the very least, in all the videos I've so far seen, I want to jump straight down on those planets and start exploring. But if you really do want to keep with a sense of realism, then planets like the Earth model in Altera is a brilliant example of that, and I very much look forward to the ability to one day start walking around planets like that in games. And talking of walking around, I really don't think a space game is complete without the ability to walk around. As of right now, unfortunately, there really aren't many space games that offer that ability. But that said, it is a feature that's in high demand. And it's something that games like Star Citizen seem to be focusing on, and I think Star Citizen is an exceptional example of it. Conversely, X-Rebirth is on the opposite end of the spectrum and is a very poor example of what it's like to walk around in space games. In that game, there's no sense of immersion, there's no place to really walk that's worthwhile. And ultimately, you're just forced to walk from A to B to achieve things that you could otherwise do very quickly on a couple of clicks of menus. EVE Online is another game that's tried its hand at walking around, and I've got to be honest here, their captain's apartments are actually very, very nice to walk around in. But the problem here is that they're isolated. The player is put in a little box room that's disconnected from the rest of the game, and that is far from ideal. So for me, the whole concept of walking around needs to fit in with the overall ideology of the game. Just think GTA in space. I'm not talking about the shooting of the cops or the running over of pedestrians. What I mean here is the ability to just walk down a street, jump in a car and drive around. Likewise, in a space game, I'd love the ability to walk over the surface of a planet or through a station and then jump in my ship and fly off, all without any loading screens. Another thing that's a big staple of space games is trading. And unfortunately, a lot of games don't seem to do it all that well. At best, Elite Dangerous has functional trading. Of course, at the bottom line, trading is just moving goods from A to B, and Elite Dangerous just managed that. But just look at these concept arts and see what else this game potentially spoke of back then. True trading needs to reflect a bit of excitement and a bit of variation, true price fluctuations, true market changes and things like that. In fact, I'd go as far to say that EVE Online probably has the best trading market in any game, full stop. At least that was the case when I last played it, and well, I haven't touched it for a couple of years, but I did play it for a long time. The fact that the commodities on the market are real, the fact that they're usable, and the fact that they're player created makes a huge difference. In a space game, the trading of moving goods from A to B needs to be heavily dependent on the marketplace, and the marketplace needs to be locked into the economy, all of it driven by a simulation. In EVE Online, that simulation was player driven. In other games, it could be NPC driven, but that requires persistent NPCs. NPCs that rely on the goods of the market, that move products from A to B themselves, and get actively involved in the entire economy. And that brings me on to another thing that I'd love to see in any space game, and that's persistent NPCs and traffic. Persistence really is a biggie, and for any game that's missing that, it really is very noticeable. Space is big and empty, so it's ideal if that can be filled up with anything of interest. In particular, shipping lanes and busy hubs are the perfect solution to this. And in combination with persistent NPCs that travel from one station to another, and indeed one system to another, this brings a whole lot of life to the game. And for concepts of that, just look at the examples here of busy space hubs. And finally, the thing I really do like most in any space game is a sense of exploration. And that goes right back to my first comment on this video about areas of space in some games just being far too small. That discourages any sense of exploration at all. And really, for me, that's what space is all about. Right from the days of Star Trek through to Star Wars and onwards to all the other fantastic space movies and TV series out there, they all ultimately focus on a sense of exploration. Now, whilst the characters in those movies or shows might not necessarily be explorers, they ultimately all have one thing in common, and that's that they all exist within a massive, unimaginable world. A world with unknown frontiers, where any possibility is just around the corner. Games all too often fail to recreate this sensation of exploration, and instead choose to focus on a certain gameplay mechanic. Maybe they ask you to map certain planets or certain stars, or maybe they ask you to send out probes so that you can participate in tiny little mini games. To me, this is about as far removed from exploration as you can actually get. True exploration is about going into the unknown, about making discoveries. It's about the realization that you're just a very small part of this massively huge world that exists around you. And any space game that can successfully convey that would have my vote of being the best damn space game out there. After all, everybody's mileage may vary on this, but for me, space isn't about shooting. It's not necessarily even about spaceships. It's about the vastness of the unknown. It's about the ability to go out and explore and make discoveries. And in the centre of all that should exist a mighty and massive civilization, where we can become anyone or do anything, whether that's trading or becoming a bounty hunter, or whether it's a smuggler or becoming an ace combat pilot, or even becoming an intrepid explorer that disappears off into the unknown for years at a time. You see, for me, the ideal space game is the perfect open world game. And whilst there isn't any game out there that fully matches this description just yet, I feel that perhaps we've just entered a time where a game like this is indeed possible, and that sooner or later we may indeed get such a game. Now, this video didn't contain an exhaustive list of all the things that could be possible within a space game, so if you've got any ideas yourself, do leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And then maybe we can discuss them in a future video, very much like this one. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time. Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant, and today I want to talk about virtuality, in particular how it relates to Elite Dangerous. Now, I'm by no means an expert on VR, but I have had about 2 years worth of experience with it.